So what did we talk in the transaction? We said that entire transaction, gets completed as a unit, okay, and all the record which is to be committed into the database, either completely the entire set of record commits to the database, or the entire set is rolled back if you use any DML operation in the Apex. Which means what we need to understand here is, in case you have an insert command in your Apex class, there is an insert or update, and you are trying to update or insert 1000 records, okay, and this is as a part of a transaction. Either all these 1000 records, so in one program, on a trigger, let's say, on a trigger, on click of a button, you execute a code which should update or create 1000 records. Okay, so this is a total number of records. Now, because it's one transaction, so either Apex will enter, or whatever. Let me take example of insert, or let me take example of update. Fine. So if in my code there is an update statement and that has to update 1000 records in the database, either it will update all the records, or all the records will be rolled back. Got that thing? So either it updates all the records, or all the records are rolled back. So everything is rolled back. So half of the transaction will not happen. It will not happen that, okay, fine, your 100 records get added and 900 do not. So if there is an error or an exception, all 1000 records will be rolled back. Got that thing? So that is our normal DML operation. So for a transaction, a normal DML operation either completes, so I'm just talking about DML operation, either it completes, it completely commits the entire set of data to the database, or it rolls back the entire thing. Very simple logic, please remember this. So Salesforce has this logic by default. So that is the reason why normal DML operation does not commit partial data. So partial data will not be committed on the database. The logic is clear. Now sometimes you might want to, you might want your code to work in such a way that whatever data before the exception is hit, or before the error, whatever data is committed into the database, let it get committed. So do not roll back. If you want that kind of a thing, then you will have to use Database.DML. So database is what? It's a class. So it's defined by Salesforce, so you do not have to do anything there. So you have these database.tml operations, database.insert, database.upsert, update. The advantage there is that your partial data will be committed. Let's say 100 records. In this case, if you're using database.update, so this is the normal usual update. This is a special update method which has been designed by Salesforce. Alright, we do not have to do anything, we just have to use this. Now, if we are using this, then what will happen? Then out of 1000 records, let's say 200 records got entered, and after that error hit the code, so these 200 will not be rolled back. Roll back, we understand, right? So something which was committed is taken back. So if you see this, process, we were talking about the transaction thing, right? So the order of execution, right? So in this, what happens, there are two things which we need to understand in this complete process. I think we understand this entire process, right? Now what happens here? First is system validation, second is before trigger, okay, and third is custom validations. Alright. So when your system validation, before trigger and custom validation thing is done, after this okay, this is where the data is created or it is entered into the table. Alright. But this is not completely committed to the database. Alright. So it gets into the object, the data gets into the object, but it is not committed. After trigger action, this is where data is committed. Further thing, because in after trigger there is scope of Apex, there is scope of you hitting a governor limit, there is a scope of exception happening, error coming up. So when your after trigger also works fine, then only data is committed to the database. Got that thing? So before that, let's say out of 1000 records, 1000 records got into the system. After trigger there was an error, all those 1000 records will be rolled back. Nothing will be actually committed to the database. Fine. However, if we are talking about database.dml functions, then this database.dml function will even do the partial update or partial insert. Fine. So whatever is committed will not be rolled back. Now depending on your requirement, you will decide which one you have to use. Whether you want to roll back the entire stuff or you want to perform partial update. Fine. So this is something which depends on the requirements. Alright. Okay. So we are clear on this. The transaction part and this DML database.dml. I will just show you where we should refer to this. Just give me a moment. So has anyone got a chance to look into the Apex Developers Guide? Have you seen Apex Developers Guide, a reference guide or developers guide, which is a big book with all the Apex and all that stuff? Anyone had a chance to work on that or look into that? No? All right. So I'll share the link for that. Apex Developers Guide here. Okay, so this is the book, Developer's Guide, and this is kind of a Bible on Apex coding. So, but the problem with these kind of books is that they are, they have a lot of content, and it's very difficult to go and read this entire stuff. But I'll tell you exactly what you need to read and where you need to find all that stuff. Fine. So I will just show you where you need to go for Database.DML. So database is basically a class defined by Salesforce only, and Database.DML is not the usual DML thing. It is something which Salesforce has defined, and we can use that. Okay. Alright, so this is where you will you can read about this DML statement versus database class methods. Fine. So I'm giving you the link as okay. So this is a class here, the database class and the methods of the database class, right? So this link talks about that part. So as you can see, the difference between the two options is that by using the database class method, you can specify whether or not to allow partial record processing. So do you want to process the records partially or not? So Database.DML can do that, but normal DML cannot process partial records. So that is a big difference here, right? Okay. So there are a few methods on the database class, like database.save results, because it's a class. This is a method on that class which has been defined, right? So it's not just about insert, update and all. There are other methods also in that, right? So you would find reference of all those methods here in this reference guide itself. Somewhere you will have database class defined. Click on reference. If I go here and if I click on database class, here it is. So these are all the methods which are there in database class. So database.undelete, database.set, database.rollback, all these methods. So there is a functionality of each of these methods. I will again, as I told you earlier, this is not something that you should go through each and everything. This is something that you just need to understand. But okay, fine. Now whatever requirement you have, once you start writing a database.dml method, then you should come and check what all methods are available. Alright. So the basic DML things are there, and other methods are also available on this database class. So if you want to read, see a few examples, how it is working, how the code is being written, this is how it should be done. Right, see, database.delete, and then the string, then the list which needs to be deleted. Okay, doomed accounts is the list of accounts. Alright, so this is also a good thing for you to refer. I think it's the same link. Okay. The problem with these HTMLs is they do not give separate links for separate pages and all. Don't know why. Alright. So we have understood. For list of all methods, see database class. So you can look for database class and you will get a list of all the methods under this class which can be used, but primarily we are talking about the DML methods like delete, insert, update. Alright. So that is there. Now the next thing that we are going to talk here is, we have understood about the transactions, we have understood about the governor limits. The next thing that we will talk here is about our asynchronous Apex. What is asynchronous or what is synchronous? Synchronous is something which happens in a sync, in a synchronized manner, right? Asynchronous is something which is not in sync. Alright, so that's the literal meaning. Now how does that come into picture in our Salesforce? Now asynchronous method is where the Apex which is going to get executed, we are talking about Apex. So Apex which is going to get executed, or the code which will be executed, is not in sync. Not in sync means, let's say for example, before we get into asynchronous, let us understand synchronous Apex. So in synchronous, what happens? An Apex is executed in sync with some other thing, like on click of a button, Apex is executed, right? Then and there, on spot. You click a button, Apex is executed. That is what happens when we call the controller on a Visual Force page. and on a trigger also, it is in sync with the DML operation. So far whatever Apex we have written, it is all synchronous Apex. Fine. So this is all synchronous Apex. Synchronous Apex, which means this is all in sync. Either in sync with the DML operation, or in sync with the click of a button, or in sync with some method which is running, right? But there are a few ways of asynchronous Apex also. Okay. So asynchronous Apex primarily has three things. One is called a future method. Okay. What is future method? Future method is a method which you define with a future annotation. Why do we define future method? Why would we define a method as a future method? I'll tell you what exactly future method is. We are okay with understanding the governor limits and everything. So we have understood that there are certain governor limits per transaction and all that thing. Now, good thing about future method is this future method executes in future. It is not something which will happen instantly. Method defining everything is the same, logic is same. The only thing that you are doing here is you are defining the method as a future method. Okay, so when you define a method as a future method, the advantage that you will have is your method will get executed in future. Now your question will be when in future? Today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, after 1 month, right? That is the question that you will have. In future means when the resources are available. Alright, when the governor limits and the resources are available, that is when this method will get executed. Sometimes it happens, right, that you have executed, you started a method by clicking on a button, but the resources are already occupied by some other thing which is happening. So this future method works when the resources are available. So as soon as the resources become available, this future method will work. So in that case, what happens? You do not hit your governor limit very quickly, right? So in case there is a limitation of sending a certain number of emails today, right? So you have already, sent a certain number of emails. Let's say out of 1000, already 900 emails are sent, right? This, if you define the other email sent on a future method, that will send it tomorrow when the limits are available back. But if you do not define it as a future method and you define it as a synchronous method, synchronous has to be done today, instant, then it will not send those emails and say, throw you an exception saying that the limit has been reached. Okay, so this is one type of your asynchronous method. Second is call it Apex scheduler or something. This is where you can schedule an Apex, that this Apex should run at this particular time. Apex scheduler. And third thing is, okay, so this is where you can define a schedule. I don't want my Apex code to get executed on click of a button. I want it to run at a particular time, right? And one more is batch Apex. Now what is batch Apex? Batch Apex is, as the name suggests, it processes the entire thing into small batches. Fine. So batch Apex will form batches. Let's say you want to, sometimes you actually have to update 1 million records. Now we have said that okay, per transaction there is a limit. 1 million cannot be done. Then what will you do? Then you will update the records in batches. Okay. Create small batches and then keep on processing those. So this will keep on happening in the backend. It will not affect your front end thing and all. So future method is something which will get executed, but this happens as a single unit again when the resources are available. This will not happen in batches. Future method will run as one single unit. So you'll have to make sure that in future method the operation that you have defined is as per your governor limits. Apex scheduler, where you can schedule an Apex code to be executed at a point of time. This is again asynchronous. And batch Apex, where the data, the processing keeps on happening in small batches. Got this thing? So if we understand this, now the question that I have is, what are the different ways of invoking Apex? So for whatever we have done, what are the different ways of invoking Apex? What do we understand? So primarily we see synchronous methods, where so primarily we see synchronous, where we have triggers, and controllers, right? So controller means the methods that you call on the Visual Force page, right? So Visual Force page methods will either load, either get executed on load of the page or on click of a button. So those are all synchronous, right? Triggers, before trigger, after trigger. So it does not happen, you cannot say that okay fine, perform an after trigger 2 hours after the record is created. It is a DML operation, it has to happen instantly. Okay, so these synchronous things and asynchronous, we talked about this. 1, 2, 3. Right. Apart from this, is there any other way of invoking Apex? Yes, there is. You can also, invoke an anonymous code block. So you can just write a small piece of code and invoke that as well. So which will not come through any method. You can straight away go and run that code. I will show you that. Before that, we will start talking on the developer console. But before I get into the developer console, I will show you where we should refer for our future method Apex scheduler. Alright, so once you are on your Apex reference guide, On this reference guide, you will find things defined very nicely. The only thing is that you have to just get into one thing at a time. If you open all the links, then you will completely get confused here. Alright? Like, if you want to understand a few syntax or things on Apex, you can just click on writing Apex and you will get the syntax, data variable types, and your if else, all these things will be here. Then close it. If you do not want to read that, don't get into that, because for everything this is a complete language, right? So for everything there are a lot of things. So if you start reading basics, you will not be able to end up reading about the syntax and all these things. So whatever you need to understand, you go the basics of Apex, how variables are defined, what are the data types, that all things, go here on this first, writing Apex. Alright. If you want to understand the ways of invoking Apex, then click on the second one. Make sure the others are not expanded, otherwise you will completely get confused. Fine. This navigation pane will look very scary to you. Now if you want to understand the ways to invoke Apex, just click on this and click on invoking Apex. Okay. Now from here you can understand the asynchronous Apex, feature methods, Apex scheduler, batch Apex. Okay. So go and read a little about feature method. So feature method is something which will have this future annotation, and this will work when your resources are available. A feature method runs in the background asynchronously. Asynchronously means not in sync. Okay. Benefit of using feature method is that some governor limits are higher, such as SQL query limits, and okay, we saw in governor limits that the limit was higher for asynchronous method, so you can use higher governor limits. Okay, so that is the thing. Each future method is queued and executes when system resources become available. So the future method starts executing when the system resources become available, which includes the governor limits also. And because asynchronous Apex has higher limits, if you define a future method, you can use a little higher limits. Okay. Like yesterday we were talking on the governor limits. Not all governor limits have higher limits for asynchronous, but some of them. See, synchronous limit and asynchronous limit. So total number of SQL queries which can be issued for synchronous is 100, for asynchronous is 200. So future method is asynchronous method. So if in future method you can write or issue 200 SQL queries. So what happened? By default you got double the limit, right? So that is an advantage. And the other advantage is that it can be queued and it can work when the resources become available. Fine. That's all. Then future, you just have to focus on these three things. Future, Apex scheduler. So in Apex scheduler, you don't have to worry about things. You just have to write a schedulable Apex. So while you define the method, you have to say implements schedulable, and once your method is written, then you will just go and schedule it. Fine. And you can monitor those Apex which has been scheduled on this monitoring scheduled jobs. Got that thing? So see, this is where it is. To invoke Apex class to run at specific times. If you want the Apex class to run at a particular time, then you can invoke an Apex class at a specific time. So first thing that you have to do for this kind of a class is you will have to say implements schedulable. So this is what you have to define. Okay. So any Apex that you want to execute at a given point of time needs to have this thing at once you define the class. So where you define the class, we define public class this. There you will have to define implements schedulable so that Salesforce understand that okay fine, this is a schedulable class. Then what you have to do? Then you have to specify the schedule for this. Schedulable, you have made a class schedulable, that is fine. Then what you have to do? You have to go and schedule this thing. Define the schedule of it. Okay. So you can define the schedule in two ways. You can define this by clicking on Schedule Apex page in the Salesforce user interface. So on Salesforce user interface, where you click on Apex classes, the list of Apex classes, you will see there is a button called Schedule Apex, right? So once you click on Schedule Apex, you will only have the option of scheduling the classes which have this implements schedulable. Fine. So that is the thing. Then you can go there and schedule your things. The other way is to use system.schedule method. System.schedule method is again through programming you want to define the schedule. So there is a system.schedule method and using that you want to define your schedule. Okay. So that option is there, but I would suggest that initially it will be a good thing for you if you work on Schedule Apex instead of system.schedule, because again that will require you to get into a few more technical things. Yeah, after some time once you become a little comfortable, then you can actually start working on this part also. So all that thing is also defined here, how to use system thing and all. System.schedule method and define the schedule programmatically, that also can be done, right? You can only have 100 scheduled Apex jobs at one time. So you cannot have more than 100 Apex scheduled jobs at any point of time. Okay. So that is the thing. Then comes the batch Apex. Now, batch Apex is primarily used for long running processes. Alright. I have to update all my database, I have to find duplicates in the entire database, I have to let's say you just had a different way of naming the opportunities. Now you have decided that okay, on every opportunity before the name of opportunity I just add something like that. Or you say that okay, for all the records that I have in system, I want to update the city. So in that kind of a situation, what you have to do, because you cannot do all that in once, so what you have to do, you have to form small batches of it and perform those as batch jobs, right? So see this thing. For example, a developer could build an archiving solution that runs on a nightly basis, looking for records past a certain date and adding them to an archive. So on a nightly basis, you can check for certain records. Let's say that we find these are the records, and then process those records only. So a small batch of records every day or every week. So those batches can be run. Okay. So this is where you can read about this batch Apex or the batch process. So batch basically has three components within it: a start method, execute method, and finish method. Okay, so start method will collect all the records. So we are not going to perform anything on the entire set of data. So start method is used for collecting the records which need to be processed in the batch. Execute method is used for doing the actual execution of the code. Okay, and the finish method, this will run only once. A finish method will run only once. When will it run? It will run only when all your batches have been processed. Okay, so when all your batches have been processed, you might want to send a confirmation email or something. So that part of thing. So the code that you have to write for collecting all the records which need to be processed goes into the start database.batchable context. Fine. Under this you will go and write your, so under this method you will go and write what you need to do to collect the data. Alright, which data should be processed, as we were talking here, that on a nightly basis, based on some criteria, you will collect the records. So those records will be put into a list or something here on the start method. Alright, execute method is where execution will happen if you want to update that list. For example, so start method, you say account list. Okay, is equal to some SQL query. Select this, that. Okay, some query. So it can be a small thing, it can be a complex thing. Perform whatever logics you want to perform, and then collect all the data into this list in the start method. Fine. Second is execute method. So you have to go and define another method. Execute method, global void method execute. Okay. Under this method, you will write what you want to do. Okay. So let's say you just want to go and say update account list. Okay. You want to update the account list. What you want to update, that you can define. You want to update the name or something. Okay. So if you want to update something or perform certain actions on the records or on that batch. So this is the batch, this is the update, so this will be execute method. So this is there, start method and execute method will run with each batch, and then the finish method. For example, send email confirmation. Okay, so in this method you will write an email confirmation to be sent to someone. It can be sent to anyone. That all the batches. So this finish method works when your all batches are done. Okay, so once that part is done. Got this thing? So this is how a batch Apex can be done or written. Alright, so just refer to this. You have examples here. You can look into that as well. Okay, so that's about our batch and these things. Apart from this, we have talked about these future methods, batch methods and all. Apart from this, as I told you, there is another thing which can be done, which is anonymous code block. Anonymous code block is you just write a code block and then you can go to developer console and run that code block. That thing is also mentioned here. Okay. So you just want to perform something. Let's say you want to fetch a record and update that, but you don't want to, there are 4 or 5 records, you want to update them, but you do not have you don't want to go to the records individually and do it, and then there is no other logic also which you can relate to it. So this is a small thing, you just want to write a code and execute it. Alright, so that can be done through developer console. So we will just get into that part, but before that you can just see an example like they have done a small code block. So this can be on the data as well. You can just go and write the code on the developer console and run that code. So if there are any database changes which need to happen within the governor limits, those can happen from there also. Alright. So that's fine. Now the other thing that we will get into is developer console. So I'll come back to this thing. Before that, I would want to show you the developer console. Now for the developer console, once you are logged in into Salesforce, give me a moment, let me log in. Alright, so you get developer console here. You click on this and then you come to the developer console. This is where you can run your anonymous code blocks, you can debug the code, you can try writing your queries, and you can do everything. So you can create Visual Force pages, you can write classes here. Alright. So you will have your debug logs here, your tests. I will show you how to test Apex and all. So those things will be here. Query editor, you have a query editor, you can write queries and find, select name from account. Yeah. You write a query here, click on execute. Right, so if you quickly want to retrieve some data, alright, so you can write queries here very quickly to fetch some data. Your debug logs will be shown here. You can create classes, triggers, pages, components, static resource from here as well. So we have talked about these things, right? So those things can be created from here. Apex trigger you create on the interface, you can create on developer console as well. Alright. So this is basically developers console. So an interface designed specially for developers. Okay. Where everything developers as in which is more related to the programmatic development side of it, right? So this is an environment where you will get each and everything related to your programming, coding and all that stuff, be it say Apex, be it Visual Force, the SOSL queries, all those things, right? You have the option of debugging the code, alright, so that way. So everything is here. The test that you do or the test methods that you write, those can be tested here. This is where you will see the performance of the test and all. Alright. So overall, for your understanding, developer console is a separate console that they have created so far. This thing has been introduced, I think, almost more than a year or so. Yeah, 1.5 to 2 years. Prior to this, there was no such developer console concept. So at that point of time, we used to write all the code as we do here. As of now, what we are doing. And the other option was to write things on Eclipse. So people who have worked on Java would understand that there is something called Eclipse, right, for programming and all, writing and all that stuff. So Eclipse was one option, and writing the code on Salesforce was the other option, right? So the reason why you would write code on Eclipse is, coding wise, it's easy to write code in Eclipse and then debug it and all that stuff, right? And if you have noticed in Salesforce, on the user interface, when we write code and all those things, it is not, for Apex it's not very friendly. For Visual Force it's very friendly, but for Apex it's not that friendly. So for that reason, Eclipse was used by some of the developers. Then these guys decided to launch their own developer console. Now Eclipse is rarely used. Okay, so it's not used very frequently. Rather, developer console is used. Okay, so there is nothing, different in developer console. Whatever we have done there, the same thing we do here. Let's say if you want to create a Visual Force page, you could have created there, you can create here as well. Enter a page name, it will give you the code. Page 321. Now keep on putting your code details here. Got it? You want to create a trigger for which object? For opportunity, name the trigger something. By default, it's before insert. If you want to write other operation, other events, write it. Fine. So if you are a developer and most of your activities involve development and you are, writing codes and pages and all those things, so this may be the environment where you might want to work. Right. Keep on developing triggers, classes, pages, all these things here itself. Fine. Got that? So all the information related to your code and everything is here. So we can run our SQL queries here and all that. Okay. So now we're on our reference guide, anonymous blocks, right? So for executing anonymous blocks, you can do it from developer console or Force.com IDE, right? So Force.com IDE is basically your Eclipse. It is on Eclipse. Okay. So Eclipse thing we'll talk a little later. So you can simply go to your developer console and then execute any code block. Right? So if a one-time code you want to execute, you can definitely execute it from developer console. Alright? So sometimes you might be asked in interview, because you guys are going to show some experience that okay, have you worked on developer console? So there is nothing that you should be scared of, that okay, I have not worked on developer console. So I would say that spend some time on developer console. There is nothing new which is happening on developer console. So you should say yes, I work on developer console. Even if you write codes directly on Salesforce, like Visual Force pages, we most of the times go and create it on the page itself. The advantage that we have for Visual Force page, that we can get a preview. So we have a code editor. So the advantage that we have is we get a preview. Every time I write a line, I save it, I get to see the preview, what changes are made, how it looks, right? So for that reason, most of the times Visual Force pages you will create on the interface itself. But for triggers and classes, you can always write them on developer console. Okay. So small tricky question can come to you that okay fine, do you write Visual Force pages on this? Even if you say yes, I write Visual Force pages on developer console, there is no problem. But I'm saying that you just be a little aware of that okay fine, this is how I used to work, or this is how I work, and this is the reason. So just have a small explanation for that thing. That is it. Alright. So developer console we have seen. Now the other thing that we will talk here is testing ethics. What is testing? Why testing? We have talked about governor limits, right? And we also understand that Salesforce is on a multi-tenant environment. Now what Salesforce wants to do, I told you yesterday that Salesforce will not let their code get affected or their environment get affected because of your wrong thing. So it will run, and at a certain stage of time when you hit the limit, it will completely exit that, throwing an exception or error. That's it. So it will not unnecessarily waste, Salesforce will not waste the common resources just because your code is wrong. So that is there, alright. But still, they do not want you to write a code which is not correct, so that you can also avoid too many errors and exceptions and all that stuff. So for that reason, before you move anything to production, try and understand this. Any Apex before move to production, you will write Apex where? On the sandbox. The earlier day we were talking about sandboxes and all, right? So we'll write code where? We'll write it on sandbox. And before these things can be moved to production, that Apex needs to be tested. Okay. Now, how will you test it? Salesforce has defined a method to test your Apex. Okay. Now you have to test your Apex, and once you test your Apex can have multiple lines of codes. Right? Let's say you have 100 lines in the lines of code. Alright. So before you can move any Apex class into production, that should have at least 75 lines, or 75% is what they say, of code covered. So when you test an Apex, you get a code coverage. The code which seems to be okay gets a code coverage. The code that does not seem to be tested does not get the code coverage. Okay. So at least 75% of your code should be covered before you can move any code to production. Till the time it is in sandbox, no problem. Write a code, it has error, it has problems, let it be. But before you can move anything to production, you have to test that, and you have to test the method or test that DML operation if that is working fine or not, and then based on that you will simply get the code coverage from Salesforce, and based on that code coverage you should be able to deploy it. Okay. So testing, what needs to be tested? All Apex methods. So your Apex methods need to be tested. Okay. If you are defining a few variables, that does not need to be tested. That is not required. But your method is working fine or not, that needs to be tested. So that is what we need to understand. Let's say my code has 20 lines, and out of those 20 lines 15 lines I am just defining methods, this, that, all those things. So that is not very important. What needs to be tested? The method, where I am updating the data, or where I am sending an email, or where I am defining a get method, or I am defining a set method, right? So that is how it works. Alright. So let me just show you a small example of test so that you get some idea of it. So let me write a simple class, public class hello. There I say string hello equals hello, how are you, right? And then I go and define a method here, public string get hello. Okay, this is my class, let's say. So there is a method in this. This is the method, right? This needs to be tested. Alright. What do you have to do? You simply have to go to another Apex class, write another class for testing this. Actual method is there. What is the name of the method? Hello. Okay. Write another method, another class. Okay. At is test. It does not necessarily have to start with this annotation. You can start your test classes with this annotation. The benefit of having this annotation is your code that you write in this class will not be counted against your Apex limit. So there is, I told you there is a governor limit for everything. There is a limit of 3 million characters for all Apex that you write. So you get from Salesforce, you get a limit of 3 million characters. It's 3 million only, right? Yeah. See? So Salesforce gives you a limit of 3 million characters. So all Apex classes combined together, you can write 3 million characters. So out of that, see, we have written 8,430 characters as of now. So that is, right? So maximum that you can reach is 3 million. Now, this limit, when they count the characters there, though that count does not include the comments. So remember, in the code, if you have commented any part of the code, that will not be counted, and as is test annotated classes. So any class with this annotation will not be counted in that limit. Fine. So you can create a test class without this annotation, but then that's not a good idea, because then the characters written in that will get counted. So write with this, but this is not this is not mandatory. You can skip this line. Okay. Again, this is also just a class, so we'll give it any name, my test class. Does not matter what you call it. Now, what you have to do here is, in this class, you have to define the test method. So use a static test method. Void. So this is the type of method you should define. Give it any name. Test method can also have any name. Test hello. So this method will be used for testing the method from that other class. Alright. Here what you can do, you can say okay, 1 minute. I think I'll need to make a few changes here. I've used this word hello a lot of times. I will just go and change it so that you don't get confused. my class 1. Alright. Okay. So in the test method, I'll call an instance of that class, my class 1, and I will call it anything. M equals new my class 1. Fine. And then m dot get hello. So this test method will define an instance of that class, and for that it will call that method m dot get hello. That's it. Then yeah. Okay, this test method spelling. Yeah. Alright, now because this is a test method and it tests this class, now you do not have to do anything. Automatically that class will get a code coverage. But before that, what you have to do, you have to run a test. Alright, you can do that on developer console as well. So in the developer console there is tests, new run. So which test you want to run? My test class. The test that you want to run, click on that, click on run. Alright, run it. Test run has been done. Open this. Okay, 0 failures, which means your test method or test was done successfully. Overall code coverage is given here for all the codes. What is the name of my code? My class 1. What is the percentage of the coverage? 100%. You want to see details? Double click on this. So our complete code is covered. 100% code coverage.
How did we write the test class? Actually, I did not understand the logic behind that.
Behind the test class or test method?
Test class, like how to write that.
There is
class.
there is no logic. There is nothing called test class actually. That is why I told you that there is no difference between a normal class and a test class. At is test annotation. You write in case you think that there are only test methods in that, then you will write that. So So what logic you could not understand? That's a different class. I have created a separate class, and inside that I have defined a method. Method will test it. Like any other class you write methods, I have written method. So what is the challenge there? Before you tell me about that, let me again repeat what I said. There is nothing called a test class. There is something called test method. Test method is again like a method, but it is only used for testing. It will not do any actual operations. Okay, so any method where you say static test method void, this is only used for testing some other method or testing something else. Okay, this kind of a method. So this method is responsible for testing. The class is not responsible for doing anything. Okay, you could have defined the same method in the actual class also, right? So, but it's always a good practice to keep the test methods in a separate class. Okay, so what we did, just for writing this method, I cannot write this method anywhere. So for that, I wrote a class. You write a class, you name it anything. So there is nothing special on this class. You name it anything, you name it ABCD. And then inside that method class, you just have to make sure that you write the method. This type of a method. Now this method should execute your testing things. Now tell me.
Like for like where we have to write this test method, like in the class we want to test, or where
do we write a normal method? Where do we write a method?
classes.
You write a method in a class, right?
Yeah.
So where you have to write this test method is exactly answer is same. You write it in the class. Okay. Now which class you want to write it in, that depends on you. Okay. You could have written it on the actual class. After this method you could have started writing the test method also. But that is not a very good practice. That is the reason why I wanted to keep my test methods in a separate class. That is the reason why I created another class. Is there any other alternative? I mean, can I write a method without defining a class? No. I have to put a method in a class. So the option is either I put it in this class, only the actual class, or I create another class. So as a practice, what you will do, for each class you will create a test class. Like you will create a class where you will have test methods. So which is not required or not mandatory, but it is a good practice, so that your things are organized. You know that, okay, fine, where do I go to find test methods for this? But there is no logic or no connection between this class and your test class. It's this method, your test method that you define there, that is what executes this thing. So you don't have to connect it with that class and all. This is an independent class. This method is executing this thing. Now you tell me. So my test method is an individual. Okay. So this is like, for example, think of it as another method which will test that method. So this is the policeman, and that other method is the thief. The thief is sitting in his house and this policeman is sitting in his house. So that is it. You do not have to think of any logic of connecting this class with that other class. Now does the logic become clear?
No, actually.
So where is the confusion? You tell me where exactly you are stuck. What logic you are trying to find out? You tell me that thing. Then I will tell you.
Actually, once we have written the class, right? And after that we have to test that class, and we
Again,
write
you
a
are
method.
again, no, wait. You are again making mistake. What did I tell you?
Oh,
What needs to be tested? Class needs to be tested. Class is nothing. Class is an envelope. What will you test in a class? Method needs to be tested. That is what I am saying. Apex class does not need to be tested. Class is just an envelope. Method needs to be tested whether the method is working properly or not. Yes? Method
okay.
is where action happens. For testing a method, I will write another test method. This is what we need to understand. Most of the times we make a mistake. People think that there is a class which is being tested and there is a test class. There is nothing called test class and no class. What will be tested in a class? Class is nothing. Just think of it. Think of a normal classroom where people are sitting. So exams happen for the students or it happens for the classroom. So class is just an envelope. That is nothing. There is nothing to test there. The method in the class need to be tested. That method may be performing a send email operation. It might be doing an insert operation. Method does all these things, right? Class itself does not.
Got it, got it. Yeah, it's clear now.
That makes a lot of sense now. So now there does not have to be any relationship between the actual class, the class where the actual method is sitting and the other class where the test method is sitting. So you can create one class and put all test methods there. But we again did not do that. For every class, the methods of one particular class, we create one more class where all those test methods are put. So that is an organizational manner. I mean, that is a way of organizing things. But from Salesforce side, there is no mandatory thing. So there should be a connection between where is my code? There should be, something happening in my test method which can go back and check that actual class. Actual method. Again, the checking is happening on the method. Clear? With others also, anyone else has any doubt or question? So testing basically, now a few things that we need to remember in test. For test. No actual understand it in this way. Very simple thing about test method. So if you are clear so far, I just want to say a few more things on the test class or test method what we are talking about. Not test class, test method. So test methods do not have access to. This is very important. If you understand this, you will understand most of the things related to testing. So test methods do not have access to database. It does not have access to your actual records, or it does not have access to your database, right? Then what do you have there? So these test methods, in case there is an insert operation or something which you have to test, don't worry, your test method will not go and do the insert. Okay? Otherwise what will happen? When I run my test, again the insert will happen, right? So your test methods do not have access to the actual database. They do not commit any data to the database. They do not fetch any data from the database. They do not update anything on the database. This is just for testing. Fine. If you have to perform an insert or anything in your test method, you have defined a test method and you have to perform something which requires some data. Let's say your actual method is for example, think of it. Your actual method is something like this: account A equals select industry from account where type equals customer direct. A dot industry Alright, let's say this is what you want to write and this is what you have written, updated. This is your actual method. For the same thing, when you write a test method, the test method should also do this thing. Update, insert, whatever, let's say on a trigger or wherever. So on test method you cannot write this thing. This will not make any sense. While testing this, if you say this line, this will be useless. Why? Because I told you it does not have access to database. It cannot fetch a record from here. Then what you have to do? Then you have to define your dummy record. So for test method, you cannot say select query and all that stuff. Not good. You will define dummy record. Something like this. New account, and for that reason you will give it any name, XYZ. You give it any name, don't worry, because this is not gonna get updated, created, nothing will happen on this. So XYZ and industry equals energy type equals CD. Right? And then just go and say dot industry. Okay, because it's a new record we are talking about, so you should firstly say insert A. This will not perform any insert because it's in a test method again, so that thing we just need to keep in mind. Right? This is your actual method. This performs the actual DML operation and all. This is a test method where I have defined as dummy record from my side. I did insert that, and this is my test. Simple. Got that thing? So that is the thing, that is what I actually want you to understand, that your test methods do not have access to the database either way. It cannot fetch data from there. If you have to do some, in your actual method, there is some data DML operation which is happening and you want to test that. So you have to supply dummy records in that while defining the test method. That is number one thing. Second thing is, you will have to supply the values also for the dummy records because they do not have any values. And any other operation that you perform in the test method actually do not get committed to the database. So that is the most important thing for testing. Alright, so your test method will not go, if this update A operation is within a test method, it will not actually update or it will not go and create any record. Clear on this? All right. So we are done with the testing part. Now one more thing that I just wanted to discuss a little on, that is the thing that we talked about, the Eclipse IDE. So Eclipse, I will not ask you to get into that too much. I don't want you to get confused. For people who have worked on Eclipse, they should only listen to this. People who have not worked on Eclipse or not aware of what Eclipse is can completely ignore. For next 3-4 minutes of discussion that we have, you can completely ignore. Just for the knowledge sake, if you want to know, you can understand. So Eclipse is basically an IDE, right? Integrated Development Environment. Now on Eclipse, you can create projects for different programming languages and all. You can write codes, Java programs or Java projects can be designed and all. Eclipse can be used for creating Salesforce projects as well. So a Salesforce project is nothing but, as we discussed earlier, combination of certain Apex classes, codes and all that stuff. So if you have Eclipse, then Eclipse is something, I don't know, I have Eclipse somewhere. But in case you have Eclipse, then on Eclipse you can go and add a plugin. Install a plugin which is called Force.com IDE. Okay, so you can install that on Eclipse. Once you install that on Eclipse, then you will be able to create Salesforce projects on Eclipse. Creating a Salesforce project on Eclipse will mean you can design the Visual Force pages or Apex controllers or classes, triggers on Eclipse also. The same way we are doing it on Developer Console. The similar kind of thing. Okay, the way we are able to create these things here, similar kind of thing. The environment will be a little different, right? So Eclipse was used a lot before this Developer Console was not there in place, right? A time when it was not in place, at that time Eclipse was used majorly. Nowadays Eclipse is very rarely used until and unless the developer is a Java developer and has always worked on Eclipse and is very comfortable with Eclipse. We do not go into Eclipse that frequently. But why I am sharing this piece of information with you, so that you are aware. I mean, somewhere someone is talking that have you ever worked on Eclipse? Don't worry about that at all. Be very confident in saying that no, I have always worked on Developer Console and the user interface. Fine. Have you worked on Eclipse? No, I have not worked on it. Why? My client never gave me. It's not your fault also. Your client also has to give you Eclipse, right? So if your client says that work on Developer Console, you will have to work on that. So don't feel that if you have not worked on Eclipse, that is a bad thing. Or so the only reason can be that okay, my client never gave me that Eclipse and I am also not comfortable. So that's absolutely fine. Yeah. If anyone is, I think someone was talking to me yesterday and said that you're willing to show some Java experience. Then related to Java, they might ask you that have you created a Java project on Eclipse and all that stuff. But that sort of thing. Nowadays, in fact, the reason for Salesforce to bring in this Developer Console is Developer Console is on cloud. Eclipse is not on cloud. The challenge with Eclipse is that is not on cloud. That is a installed package, like any other software, right? So that is one thing. Second thing is, this entire thing stays here. On Eclipse, you have an option of taking a copy of the entire thing on your local computer. Sometimes companies do not prefer that. Someone takes a complete copy of the project on their desktop and all that stuff and saves everything in the XML format. For that reason also, companies nowadays enforce their developers to work on Developer Console instead of going into Eclipse and all, right? So let me just give it. Okay, fine. Now, so for those who want to explore a little on Eclipse, in case you have time and you have some understanding on Eclipse, so for those who are completely new to it, don't get into that. My strong recommendation. For those who have some understanding, so you know where to get Eclipse. So Eclipse, others also you can download Eclipse online. Now download Eclipse and then install it. It is like any other software, and then you will have to install Force.com IDE on Eclipse. So I can just share a link with you. Once you install that, you can create Salesforce projects on Eclipse, and then so here is a link which will show you how to install Force.com IDE for Eclipse. Okay. So once you install Eclipse, you will have an option of creating new Salesforce project. When you create a new Salesforce project, it will ask you for the login ID password. You will provide your company's, whatever Salesforce login ID password, and then you will be able to create pages and all those things, or controllers and other components for your Salesforce, right? So that is how that can work. But for people who are not familiar with Eclipse, just leave it. Just understand this thing, that Eclipse is also a development environment, IDE, and Force.com IDE is a plugin. Using that plugin, we can develop on that environment as well for Salesforce. All right, and it will be good if we spend a little time on developer console. That will be better, because you don't have to actually get into unnecessary stuff. You can see how it works and everything. All right. So are we clear? Any questions, doubts, questions, queries? Please let me know. No, that's it. Okay. All right then. Thank you. Thank you all.